right, ladies and gentlemen. We have an amazing guest today. I recently had the privilege of being on her podcast just a few weeks ago, and she was so gracious to drive down here to Vista, California, return the favor. This is someone that I've personally been inspired by her boldness, her courage, her wit, and ability to have good faith debates with people. And I don't think I've ever seen her get flustered in these tense situations. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the wonderful Lila Rose.
Thanks, Ruslan. That's very kind.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
Great to be here.
I got so many things I want to talk to you about, but for those folks that may not be familiar with your personal story, before we get into live action and you being on Dr. Phil and owning the red pill and all these different things, for folks who don't know, let's take them back to where you're from, what kind of family, upbringing, those sorts of things, and just share a bit about your story.
Yeah, so I'm from San Jose, California,
Okay.
so born and bred Californian, and I'm one of 8 kids, got 5 brothers and 2 sisters, and we were homeschooled.
Respect.
So already,
respect. I like
You're
it.
homeschooling. I
Yes,
heard that.
yes.
Actually had my first homeschool lesson, or one of my first, with my 3-year-old. So this morning I'm kind of trying it out, and he's a little young for school, but he was into it. He liked it.
Start him early.
But it was really kind of a special upbringing in that we got to explore lots of different things as kids and do lots of different extracurriculars. And my parents were really. My dad was a stereotypical nerd and like into software and into books, and my mom was into teaching. And so it was a really beautiful upbringing in many ways, but it gave me the freedom as a kid to explore things I was really interested in and follow my creativity. And one of the things that I became really passionate about as a kid was fighting for life. And so I can tell you that story, basically like the genesis of Live Action, my organization or one of my organizations. But yeah, being also one of 8 kids, you just see the beauty. And I know everybody has different family backgrounds. Just because you're from a big family doesn't mean your family's perfect. Mine certainly wasn't. But there was this beautiful sense of life is a gift. And like, I'm the 3rd oldest girl, lots of babies in the house. So there's just like, life is beautiful.
Yeah.
Kids are good, chaotic. But that was like the experience growing up was a very pro-life one, just by the way we lived.
Were your parents outspoken about the position, or was it church, or like what was it?
Yeah, interestingly, so my parents were obviously pro-life. I mean, they had 8 kids, but they weren't activists. So the first time I ever went outside in a clinic, I would end up going undercover in a clinics later on, but my first time physically at a clinic was to pray outside at 14 years old.
Wow.
And that was the first person in my family to do that. And that was born out of just things that really moved me as a kid. When I learned, I was mostly through books, honestly, that I found out about it. I started to study it, but my parents allowed me to go down this journey. You know, they were very encouraging and supportive of my activism as a kid, which is unusual. You know, if I had to go, typical school, every day a week for 8 hours, 8 hours a day, it would have been different, I think.
Were your parents people of faith as well?
Yeah. So we grew up I was raised evangelical in sort of a, Bible-based Protestant church, really great faith community in many ways. It was almost never talked about.
Interesting.
Almost never. So I don't even remember a single time it was talked about growing up. And it wasn't until high school when I would ask my youth pastor, hey, like the rate is the same among self-professed Christians as it is among the secular world. I mean, according to surveys of women who've had abortions, they identify as Christian just as much as non-Christian. And, obviously kids in high school are going to be, maybe if they're, sleeping around, or if they have sex and they get pregnant, they might be facing an unplanned pregnancy. What's the church's response to what do we say? If we say nothing, then we are basically enabling the culture's preying on women and girls.
Wow.
So my youth pastor took me a year. I would meet with him, and it took me a year to convince him to talk about in the youth group.
Good
and
for you. Did you press him on this?
Eventually we did. Eventually he let me and some friends come in, and we had this presentation we designed. I was like 15 years old, and we did this whole thing about what abortion is, what fetal development is, the facts of life, the harm to women. But it took a year.
How big was your youth group?
I think probably up to 100 kids. I mean, it was a good size. Probably that would come on Sundays, maybe 40, 50 kids.
Okay, so I mean, this is a big size group of
Yeah,
of
the church
people.
was several thousand,
Yeah.
I think, families.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So you start wanting to share this with your pastor, and then you go out and you pray in front of this clinic, and then like how does it compound and turn into all of this now?
How did it? I mean, it still feels crazy when you look at like, you start something and you don't realize where it's going to go.
Yeah.
But I was first convicted because I actually found out about what abortion was by reading this book. And it had the history of abortion in America. It had the statistics. So at the time, there were over 3,000 abortions happening daily. Most people had no clue. I had no clue. It talked about how abortion was legal through all 3 trimesters in some states. And then in the first trimester, the baby, the heart is beating at just 3.5 weeks. Brain waves firing by just 7 weeks. And I actually saw images of victims. And there's nothing that will...
Victims that survived?
Of children killed by...
Okay, children that were killed by... Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
and there's nothing more powerful than an image of someone, a human. You can tell the humanity of the baby in the first trimester. You can see arms, legs, a tiny face.
10 fingers, 10 toes, everything,
It's heartbreaking to actually see what it does to that first trimester baby. Most people have no clue. They think it's just a blood clot. It's just a bunch of cells. They're brainwashed by our society who dehumanizes the baby. And I saw this image of this baby, 10 weeks old, first trimester, who'd been torn apart by a suction procedure. And I was just deeply moved by that. And I thought, I have to do something about this. I can't pretend this isn't happening, especially when it's happening 3,000 times a day. And get this, 10 miles from my home where I grew up in San Jose, there's a Planned Parenthood clinic killing babies up to 24 weeks. Pain-capable babies, some of them old enough to survive outside the womb with medical care, dismembering them. And I was just like, I can't not do something about this. So that inspired me to start Pro-Life Club, which would later become Live Action. And at 14, with my parents' permission, I got in touch with a church who knew somebody that was praying outside of there peacefully, went outside in front of my first clinic just to pray and just to stand in solidarity. And I mean, you watch girls and women going in, some of them crying. You see some of them visibly pregnant, knowing they're going to go into this brick building. Their children are going to be killed. They're going to walk out without that baby. And it changes you. And I was just like, I gotta get in this fight. This is the fight of our day.
How did that evolve from Pro-Life Club at your high school into building a nonprofit and doing the advocacy work that you do now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was taking the next right step to continue to grow the mission. So Pro-Life Club turned into Live Action when I realized we needed like an official name. And we were like, what should we call it? It was with some friends in my parents' living room. And I'm like, it needs to be about action. It needs to be about life. It needs to be about media. Let's call it Live Action. They're like, my friend was like, that's a stupid name. And I was like,
that didn't age well.
That's the name. It is Live Action. And then we started doing presentations at churches and schools to educate other kids our age, other teens. And that was my first youth pastor. My youth pastor was my first church. After that, we did dozens of churches and dozens of schools. And then after that, I ended up in college. I go to college, UCLA. Kind of chose it to do activism, to be honest. Got there, started Live Action UCLA. Started my classes, my extracurriculars, but started doing activism on campus. Started a pro-life magazine for campus. Started doing investigations of my healthcare center on campus. And then started doing investigations of local clinics in Los Angeles.
And when would you say that it kind of became what it is now? After college?
I think a big moment was after one of my first undercover investigations, which, by the way, I did with James O'Keefe. I don't know if you've seen any of his stuff, Project Veritas now. Or no, not anymore, a different organization. But anyways, I had met him in college. He was working for another organization, and he was helping train other students. But anyways, I did this first couple investigations, put them on YouTube. This was like the early days of YouTube.
Yes, back in the day.
Put them on YouTube. And these are undercover investigations showing Planned Parenthood, the biggest chain, covering up abuse of minors and giving them secret abortions. So I'm posing as the minor girl, 15 years old, saying I have a much older boyfriend, I'm pregnant, what do I do? This is statutory. This is illegal in the state of California. And you're supposed to report it as a medical provider. Planned Parenthood doesn't report it. They tell me to lie about my age on the paperwork. And I have this on camera.
Wow.
And so I put this on YouTube. gets like 100 views the first day.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, 50 from me, 50 for my mom watching it on her computer.
Over and over. We're gonna run the views up.
You got to start somewhere. And then within a few days, it's like 20,000 views.
Wow.
Because blogs started to pick it up. Like, who's this college girl, 18 years old, doing these investigations of clinics? And then I get my first like Fox News primetime cable hit. And then I, long story short, get Planned Parenthood tries to sue me.
Wow.
They threaten to sue me. This pro bono legal group called ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom. I get in touch with them. They're like, we'll help you because you're trying to do good work. And it's unfair that they're trying to sue you for doing investigative reporting of them. California is really biased. I get my first attorney. I get my first PR kind of support through this organization, do more media. Then I get to meet another attorney through another organization. And he's like, I'll help you file pro bono nonprofit status. And then we launched Live Action News and our website. And then I start thinking, okay, this isn't just Los Angeles. This isn't just UCLA. It is a crisis globally. And the industry needs to be exposed, but no one's doing it. Like, when was the last time the New York Times did an expose of an clinic?
Yeah, I can't think of any.
They support it. They're all. So that inspired me to start, let's take this national. And so while a student, I started traveling the country on summer break or on spring break, or I would just take off from class, to be perfectly honest, and go out and start doing undercover investigations of clinics, publishing my reports, putting them out in my magazine, on my website. And that launched our national, you could say, imprint.
And what year was that where you guys officially like became, because it sounds like this is a very slow, but when did it kind of become you guys are almost the face of the pro-life movement now. When would you say that moment happened? Was it probably before the Dr. Phil moment?
So we were like the biggest social media platform for the pro-life movement almost from the beginning, because social media was kind of growing up alongside Live Action. And we recognized, because I'm a millennial. I think you're a millennial, right?
Yep.
And then we quickly started employing Gen Zers as we got older. And so we just knew this is where it's at. Like, the debate is happening on the internet. Public opinion the narratives are shaped here on Instagram, here on, now on TikTok and on YouTube. So we're using these platforms from the get-go to build the pro-life movement. And so that's why, now we have over 6 million followers. And we just kind of grew up with independent media. And we became the biggest source of independent media for the pro-life movement, or even the side. Like, we're bigger than Planned Parenthood on social media.
That's awesome. It's when I think New York Times did run a thing on porn, and their
I saw that
angle was that the youth tie-in, like the number of youth that are associated with it and the number of people that are getting trafficked with it, right? And then they kind of more or less came out and were like, yeah, this isn't a net positive to society. When you did your undercover work, and I've heard this statistic before, that there is a lot of trafficking covered up, that there is a lot of statutory covered up by and they don't ever report it like they're supposed to. How many times did you see that play out? And what are the numbers of that? Like, because I would think if there's any place where we would find common ground, it would be on like, let's stop trafficking. like if there's anything that, like, if you're not a Christian, you're like, I still don't want girls to be trafficked, and then Planned Parenthood cover it up.
So we documented trafficking cover up, actually, and sexual abuse cover up of minors in 17 Planned Parenthood clinics. And what was the justice? Some of the Planned Parenthood workers were fired. So Planned Parenthood would throw their employees under the bus, say, oh, this isn't systemic, this is your fault. I'm like, 17 times, come on, guys. And then they were defunded in some states after our investigative reports. There was actually a grand jury trial convened to investigate one of the nurses, at Planned Parenthood. These are like managers. So like in New Jersey, as an example, our investigators, so I trained them, went undercover posing as like a pimp and his prostitute, basically, or his kind of assistant. And they're sitting down with a manager of a New Jersey Planned Parenthood clinic in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. And they're saying, we've got these girls. They're from Latin America, basically. They're 12 and 13. We need services for them. And the Planned Parenthood workers like, tell me more, whatever. And they're like, yeah, well, we want them to be able to get abortions here. Do you have discounts for us? And she's like, I got you.
My
And
gosh.
then this is where it got the most twisted you can imagine. The Planned Parenthood worker, our sort of investigator says, yeah, what do I do after the abortion to continue to make money? The girl's got to make money because after an abortion, you're not supposed to have intercourse for like 2 weeks. And so like the girl's got to make money. So how are we going to make money after they get an abortion? And this Planned Parenthood manager is like, waist up.
Ugh.
Waist up, do stuff, waist up with them.
Oh my god!
I mean, this is Planned Parenthood, the biggest chain in the country.
It's managers.
Managers are instructing our investigators how to traffic teenage, like 12 and 13-year-old girls. And you would think that Planned Parenthood is getting over $500 million in taxpayer money. By the way, like that was the whole like underpinning here. We're doing these investigations because we're exposing the evil happening that everyone's ignoring, the media, the politicians. So after that, the House of Representatives actually passed the first ban on Planned Parenthood funding in history.
Wow.
Bipartisan. So Democrats, Independents, and Republicans voted for this.
And
but that's maybe when we
this?
really, that was 2011.
2011.
So I was like just graduated college. I think
on.
that was the year we were really on the map as an organization. Like, okay, they're serious. They're impacting political change.
Come on. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really powerful that you guys impacted policy, and wow. And so have they stopped doing this? Is it still happening? Like
it's still no, they're a lot more careful. I do think they call Child Protective Services and the police more than they did in the past because they know they're being watched. But they're committing a lot of other heinous crimes. An example, one of my former Planned Parenthood or live action team members, David Daleiden, he went on to investigate the baby parts sale at Planned Parenthood. So I don't know if you saw these videos.
I've heard of this. I don't remember this.
You should have him on the show. He's actually here in Southern California.
Okay.
But he's phenomenal, and he went and investigated and exposed Planned Parenthood after they killed these babies. They will put them on ice, give them to a middleman who will sell them they can make several $100s a baby, sell their heart, their liver, their lungs, sell different parts of their brain, different parts of this baby, usually 20-week-old baby.
Ugh.
I mean, this is a baby that within weeks can survive outside the womb. We're talking an infant here that they slice up and sell the pieces of. And this is all documented on tape. So what's happening with Planned Parenthood today? Well, they're still getting you're still getting federal tax money. They're defunded in a lot of states thanks to all of this investigative work. But they're still getting tax money. I mean, under President Biden, he loves them. Our current administration loves Planned Parenthood. They can do no wrong. So they're the biggest chain. They're killing over 1,000 children every day. And they're doing all of these other evils in association with the evil of
it. Has went down since you guys been doing this stuff?
It has.
What do the numbers look like now?
So when I started, it was like, I think 300. Now we're 2,500 a day, children killed. I mean,
still a lot.
It's insane. It's the leading cause of death. There's no other cause of death. Heart disease, cancer, accidents. Kills more human beings than any other cause of death. What
was your impression when the Supreme Court finally overturned Roe v. Wade? That seemed like a big deal that, if I'm honest, I think most Christians weren't expecting that to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of people had kind of given it up. I hate when people give up, by the way. I'm like, guys, have vision, believe, fight. I know it's tempting to give up, but God has a plan and we'd have to fight for it. But I wasn't surprised. I kind of believed I always believed it would happen. I believe it will be abolished in this country. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and how much, especially Christians, are willing to acknowledge this is a human rights abuse. And this is not just killing our children, it's wounding our women. It's wounding our men. It's destroying our families. So I think that, Roe v. Wade being overruled, step one. Now we have the battles to fight because children are being killed in places like California. You're going to have to bleep out a lot of words, right?
It's all good. We'll make it work. Here's something that I was listening to someone who, again, I would call them like pro-life light or pro-choice light. And they said this, it was really interesting. They said, at one point, will be a thing of the past because of technological breakthrough or because of legalities or whatever. And then how will we look back at this 100 years or 50 years after the fact? Like how, like objectively speaking, like how will we look back at this in the realistic sense of what is actually transpiring? Not what we think is transpiring, not what we're told is transpiring, but in the reality of what's transpiring. And we'll probably look back at it like, you know, frontal lobotomies, you know, used to treat mental health, you know, and it's like, you know, it's so the antithesis to what actually healthcare is and what is actually going to help. Like this doesn't help people. This isn't a net positive for the people that are going through it. This isn't a net positive for the guys that are pushing women to do this. And I think when we look back at this, like we're going to look back and be like, we had this dark moment in our history and I can't believe we were okay with it.
I mean, we've had a lot of other dark moments in our history, and not just America's history, but in
World
civilizations, world histories. In our country during the time of slavery, you look back at what the abolitionists were dealing with at the time, those fighting against the legalization of enslaving your fellow human beings. And they were told it's impossible. Oh, slavery is so enshrined in our culture, in our DNA as a society. We can never, it's legal. It's been done for centuries by civilizations across the world. Slavery is just a part of life. It's how things are. Why you guys are crazy, basically. And abolitionists really struggled to make their way, to fight for their cause. But they believed, no, I believe in America without slavery. And after a bloody civil war and after a tremendous amount of work, blood, sweat, and tears, they accomplished that vision. And obviously there's still more fights to be had. I mean, segregation and racism, there's still work to be done. You look at Nazi Germany. What was the crime? What was the death toll in Nazi Germany? 6-7 million human beings extinguished because of their ancestry, because they were Jewish or because they were gypsies, because of their political dissidence. Obviously, primarily it was the anti-Semitism that was a huge driver of the slaughter, right? The bloodshed. It's insane. But you look back and Germans, everyday Germans, they didn't think of themselves as killers. They didn't think of themselves as part of the evil. They were just like, oh yeah, we know bad stuff is happening over there, but we're not going to get too involved. We're not going to get, it's not really, is it our fight? We're going to just try to get through this war. America today has killed over 60 million children since Roe v. Wade. It eclipses any other human rights abuse over the last few centuries. What's our response? What's our response?
And I have a lot of responses that have gotten me in trouble, but so have you. You've gone on some big platforms and you've debated this, and I would say at times been dehumanized and attacked personally. I think the time, I'm trying to think when I first saw your stuff. I think it was. I've seen live action for a while, but I think I saw you probably first on Dr. Phil. I want to say, how long ago was that?
Last fall.
That was last fall. Tell me what that experience was like, because that was intense. And in good faith conversations, we always talk about. Can we lower your mic?
Yeah, sorry.
And then just point it up for me, just a smidge. Yeah. There we go. On Dr. Phil, you go on there and you have this conversation, and they were so mean to you, and you were able to stay so stoic and composed, and I was so impressed. So walk me through what that experience was like on Dr. Phil, and because I gotta go through all of the moments I've seen you just crush, but walk me through that.
Well, first, a little backstory. I have been talking to people who disagree with me for since I was 14 years old.
It's like your superpower.
So I mean, you do it enough times, and you're like, nothing surprises you anymore. And by the way, anyone who's listening who's like, oh, I'm so scared to engage someone who disagrees, it's just it's like working a muscle. You just have to do it, lovingly. You're not going to get it right every time, but put yourself out there and have the conversation. So by the time I get to Dr. Phil, I have been doing I've done CNN, I've done MSNBC. I've talked to all of these hostile people for years, really, because all through my 20s, that's what I did. And even in college, that's what I was doing, talking to other fellow students. So Dr. Phil, he didn't really scare me. He's a nice guy. It was just like, okay, let's see what we've got here. And it was funny because the producer had told my team as we were booking it They're like, okay, the audience, we make sure 50% pro-life,
Yeah, right.
50% pro-choice.
Yeah, right. That's nonsense.
I know. And I was like, I kind of went, I'm like a little suspicious about that because they say stuff like that, you know, we're fair. And then afterwards, Dr. Phil asked the audience, how many of you support a woman's right to choose? And especially the way you say that, it's so biased. How many of you support dismembering a child in the womb, right? It depends how you say it.
Right.
And every hand almost shouts out except for like my friend in the audience, you know? So I'm like, guys, come on. This was not set up to be fair to the pro-life point of view. But nonetheless, yeah, I mean, I think there's so much anger around a lot of things today.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are hurting. And so when these discussions are had, that anger can bubble up. And when it comes to, you know, if you've had an abortion, and I've interviewed so many who've had abortions, I know people, you know, people on our team, meaning they've had one and they realize what it was. And they, I mean, especially as a Christian, they repent for that. And they find forgiveness and healing for that. And they become some of our strongest ambassadors for life. But if you don't feel forgiven, if you haven't acknowledged what happened, if you're stuffing that pain and that shame down, what happens? Anger happens when you're confronted with reality. And so I see that a lot. And I think that's what happened on Dr. Phil, is there were several audience members or members there who were advocating for that were just angry. And they couldn't handle anyone daring to tell them that that was a child. That was a human life, because that reality, and this is my psychoanalysis, I don't know their exact stories, but I see this at large. There's so much anger and pain out there. So when you see that anger, there's pain underneath it. And that's why I think it's a moment to be compassionate, honestly, because this is a person who's still at war with themselves or maybe someone close to them. And they're not going to find peace until they first acknowledge the reality of what that was, which was the death of a child, the killing of a child. And then to deal with that reality, you need some serious grace. How can any of us deal with our own sin and shortcomings without serious grace? And if you reject that grace, I don't need it. It was my right. It's a woman's empowerment. I think that just leads to so much misery.
And so from your vantage point, was that a tough environment for you to be in terms of being the only pro-life voice in that room, more or less?
I mean, there were a couple other pro-life, they've kind of put them off on the side, you know, that did say some really good things. I was the kind of main one up against, I think, 3 other, you know, folks. I mean, I'm always like going into those things. I do have a lot of interior, like, okay, am I going to do a good job? You know, God give me the strength. Like I'm not perfect. I mess up. Like I'm not like some infallible person. So I want to do a good job representing the truth and doing it with love. And I don't know what, you know, tricks they're going to play or what they're going to throw at me. So there is certainly, you know, some questioning going in, but again, if you do it enough times, it gets easier. So the first time I ever did like a live TV interview, that was like, I was like shaking my boots or whatever. I wasn't wearing boots, but I was like, how's this going to go? I'm going to totally screw up, you know? And then afterwards, like, I totally did terrible. So, you know, you do it enough times and it gets easier.
Is that the best format for these sorts of conversations though?
I think the best format is a long conversation between 2 people with maybe a moderator or a few people, not like let's have people fight on TV for 30 minutes and then call it, you know?
Because I mean, it's tough to speak in sound bites.
It really is.
It's hard to speak in sound bites. And no, Dr. Phil, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a CNN news hit where it's 5-minute segment on like, tell us why you're right. Never right. Like it's not that form, but it's still a pretty condensed format. And it's so highly emotional. That moment I remember watching, it's like, wow, this is so highly emotionally charged because, and I'll tell you what I think the entire conversation comes down to towards the end in terms of my thoughts. I hope I don't forget. But it doesn't seem like it's the most conducive way to have these conversations, isn't like back and forth, yelling, attacking, you know, because it's the stuff that they were saying about you. I was like, ugh, like these are like not nice things to say. And it's not good faith. And it's strictly appeal to motive, as if like anyone who's pro-life is desiring to suppress women. Like that has to be a one-to-one. And it's like, that's no.
But I think that's right. Cause like the ad hominems of like, you have no empathy, you hate women, that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, I'm a woman and I have empathy for you saying I have no empathy because I understand where you're coming from in your pain. And if you can kind of go through that process with that person who's sort of attacking you, it diffuses it, at least in my heart. You know, it's like, okay, you're coming from a place of confusion and pain.
Right, right. How is that in juxtaposition with sitting down from Brenda from God is Gray, which I watched that whole thing. And that was like, I'm going to say a 3-hour conversation. And I know Brenda. I've had her on my channel before. She's sweet. But I think she is so in tune with her positions that then she'll put herself in positions to go 3 hours with you on something that like she just did not do a good job. And from my vantage point, like it didn't seem coherent. It didn't seem logical. And so I think you did a good job of like really laying out the case, and you were able to go super long, and there wasn't no cutoffs, and there was no personal attacks and no personal. It wasn't as like emotionally charged as the Dr. Phil moment. What did you make of that conversation? Because I thought that was great. Like I watched that back and I was like, like let's flesh this out to its logical conclusion on both sides. And then all the, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? All that can be fleshed out. And I thought, to me, that was a great conversation.
I thought so too. And a huge kudos to Ellen Fisher, who hosted that.
She was great.
She's a friend, and she's actually going to be coming to, I think, SoCal in a little bit. So you should
Amazing.
have her on.
I would love to have her on.
I know.
Yeah.
But she's phenomenal, and she's such a loving person. And I think Brenda, you know, I think she sincerely wanted to talk, and I really appreciated that. You know, sit down for 3 hours and talk. That's a big a big
Brenda's
thing.
Curious. That's what I appreciate about Brenda. Brenda doesn't just dismiss and discard people and label them as like, oh, you're just a pro-life fringe right activist. Like she's genuinely curious and I feel like tends to come from a good faith place.
But I think she had a really hard job, which is defending what is ultimately the indefensible.
Right.
Like if you really sit down and unpack all the justifications for, and you unpack what a is, and you unpack what has happened to our society post Roe v. Wade, you end up at the same place, which is that this is the intentional destruction of an innocent life, and we can do better, and we have to do better as a society. So let's work on making life better. Let's like work on helping women and serving women, helping children, improve the foster care system, improve adoption, helping be there for single mothers. Like let's work on those positive things. And she kind of agreed with a lot of that, but at the same time, she was conflicted because, at least this is my impression, because I think, you know, when your brand or your political identity or social identity is that women's empowerment equals pro-choice, equals, it's really hard to walk that back.
Yeah.
It's hard to walk that back.
Yeah.
That's why I have so much respect for, you know, physicians who used to commit abortions who are now passionately pro-life and speaking against it, Planned Parenthood workers who left Planned Parenthood and now are passionately speaking against it. Those conversion stories, that takes courage.
Yeah.
And it takes a willingness to be wrong and a willingness to be like, yeah, everything I said in the past, I don't stand by.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that's where we got to pray for, you know, as Christians, pray for our enemies, pray for our opponents, because we are given this grace by God's grace.
Yeah.
You know, for us to be like, we're superior because we have the truth. No, you're actually a servant.
That's good.
Because you have the truth.
Yeah.
You're meant to serve others with that truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think in having those conversations, I think those could be difficult because it always reverts to just a highly emotionally charged conversation, right? I want to come back to pro-life and all that kind of stuff, but you've since expanded the areas that you have conversations, and the most frequent that I saw, and I reacted to it, and a bunch of folks reacted to it and went viral on Twitter, was you on the Whatever podcast talking specifically to Justin Weller. I think is it Wheeler? I always butcher his name. He's one of Andrew Tate's close friends. And you've been curious about the red pill and some of the things there. So what was your impression of that in hindsight? Because that seemed like he seemed so flustered. And they value stoicism so much in those circles.
Yeah.
And I actually have some mutual friends with him, and I was so like, wow, man, like you really let a woman who are like, oh, how dare you, like I'm an alpha, like get under your skin. And it just, I don't think it was a good look for him. I don't think it was a good look for the red pill community. What was your impression of that exchange?
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of just going back to even going on the Whatever, and I, you know, starting my podcast recently and stuff, it's all born out of everything we're dealing with as a culture. Abortion's one horrible thing, and I would say the most horrible thing, but there's so much confusion, right? And life is meant to be a gift and beautiful. So let's fight for truth, goodness, and beauty and find how to live these together. So like that's kind of my motivation for even going on Whatever. And yeah, when I went on, I didn't know who Justin was, to be honest. Like I've only begun to kind of get more aware of the different Red Pill community, and understand the different players and stuff. And he seemed like a nice guy beforehand, and so I was sincerely asking him questions about the things he was saying, because he was saying, he had a very strong opinion about like men are this way, women are this way, and women need to not be, what do they call them, 3 or 4s, right? And women need to be, be submissive and docile and, whatever. And then we look for traditional women. And then as men, we need to just kind of have this freedom to date whoever we want, or just date freely and sleep around, etc. It just seems very inconsistent.
Yeah.
So I was just asking him questions sincerely, and I didn't expect him to get so upset about it, but it also didn't faze me, because I was like, okay, this guy clearly maybe is at war with his own beliefs internally. I don't know. Yeah. Let's keep questioning and see where this goes. And so, yeah, I didn't really think a lot of it, to be honest, when I was having the conversation, because I was just like, oh, this guy seems like kind of maybe having a bad night, And then afterwards, when the clips were going viral, I was like, oh, I see that I was challenging like some of these doctrines.
Yeah, I mean, some of their dogma.
Which I kind of knew in the back of my mind that these were like beliefs. But I didn't really realize, to be honest, how significant Justin was in being challenged in that world, until he said on the show, like, I'm a friend of Andrew Tate's and stuff. And I was like, okay, well, I guess you should be able to advocate for this lifestyle choice, basically, that these men are holding. So.
How was the conversation? How was it after you guys finished the podcast? Was the interactions
Well, it was
after?
like 2 a.m. in the morning. Or no, what time was it? It was like 1 a.m. in the morning. And the show kind of went off the rails, because this one young woman who was so sweet, she kind of was picked on, in my opinion, by the host. And it kind of just devolved. And so by the time the show ended, it kind of was sort of like a car crash ending. And then everyone was really tired. I had a long drive back to home and get back to my kids. So we kind of said, nice to meet you. I said, nice to meet you. And we were all like, okay, we're all out of here.
Let's get out of here.
We weren't like hanging out afterwards.
There was no friendly talk.
No, there was, we were I felt it was friendly, but we're not like, okay, let's all go get a hamburger now. It's just like, we were just.
That's funny.
We were tired.
To be fair, I did not watch the end of the pod. I just watched
it goes to like midnight or 1 a.m. And you're just having sat there for 4 hours.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of intense show.
You had some interactions with some other women about the pro-life position on that. How was that from your perspective?
Yeah, so I went on there hoping to have more conversations about life and womanhood and everything. And yeah, I did have a conversation with one of the women there in particular, who was kind of advocating for being a professional 304 or whatever, and like a professional. I don't know. Like, how can you do this professionally? But she had this whole story about being a pastor, and then she was becoming this, basically prostituting herself, which is just tragic and awful. But she was obviously, also not obviously, but she was also in support of. And so she was saying like, oh, they're just cells. The child, it's just a cell. So why do you care so much, basically? And I was like, well, you're made of cells. So where are you going with this? Right. And then she's like, I don't want to talk about it. Yeah. So I was like, okay, we didn't go very deep there. But next time,
Yeah. No, I think it's really, I think those moments are really good. And I'm glad you're getting invited into these spaces and being the voice of reason.
And I appreciate that the host, by the way, I know I mentioned I didn't like the way they treated the one girl. I do appreciate that the host is willing to have a space for these conversations. Yeah. Even though they're chaotic and crazy, that's part of, I think, the entertainment value for a lot of people. But, where else in the country are we having conversations with people who radically disagree and live differently, where you're showing up and just being very raw about your personal life and discussing that? I think that's a rarity, and I think that's actually a good thing, and it's needed.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they do a good job of putting people in a room that are different and being willing to let people go at it. And I think I actually think that's a net positive, because I believe the best ideas win. Yeah. I believe the best ideas win.
Oh, one more thing to say about earlier about the red pill community. I think that those men could be such amazing leaders. I mean, imagine if they took their drive, their competitiveness, their talent, their hard work, and they channeled it towards virtue. Not just some virtues, but all the virtues. Self-control, not just in one area, but in all the areas. Yeah. And channeled it towards the ultimate end that I think we're called to as human beings, which is love. Yep. Love of other people, which is seeing seeing the good in another person and wanting and willing the good for that person.
Yeah.
And so imagine if the Andrew Tates of the world or the Justins of the world, they took, all that drive, all that competitiveness, all that intensity, and they're like, we're going to be servants of humanity by living by the moral law.
Yep.
And not just saying men live by it or women live by it, but men don't in one area. No, we're children of God together.
Yes.
So let's follow God's law together.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they would be leaders.
Yeah. What was your impression sitting down with Zuby? Because Zuby is very close in those circles. Zuby's a politician, man. Zuby's great.
Is he?
I mean, like not in literal sense.
Is he running? What's he running for?
Well, he can be in a room with me and find a ton of common ground with me, and then be in a room with Andrew Tate and Justin and Fresh and Fit the next week, and I'm just like, man, like the respect to you, And I had an illustration. I'll see if I'll share it with you and see if you think about it. But having him on the channel, I know you guys talked about some of this. What was your impression from his perspective? Because he's really close to a lot of these guys, and there's some overlap with values. But he's also like, no, you guys are stupid on some of this stuff. Like, not all high value men are going to cheat. You don't need to go rack up your body count. Like, what was your impression talking to Zuby about this?
Well, I thought it was refreshing because here's someone, like you say, who seems to be adjacent or involved in those circles, and he's like, no, he wants to be faithful. He wants a marriage like his parents have. I think they're married. I don't know. I mean, my parents are married 50 years. Mine are 40 years. I mean, that's a prize to cherish and to a legacy you want to continue. And how do you continue the legacy of a strong marriage? You'd make sacrifices.
Yep.
You practice self-control.
Yep.
You grow in virtue. There's no other way.
Yep.
There's no other way.
Yep.
And so he seems like he really wants to do that. And I admire that. And I think we need more male voices.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. Men have been so viciously attacked at large by so many parts of feminism. So I agree with that. I think it's horrible. And I think that we need more male and female role models. We just need more role models, period. And so to have a man like Zuby who's willing to say, I mean, he said it when I interviewed him, I think it's coming out tomorrow. What's today? Wednesday, tomorrow, Thursday. Yeah. But he's going to, he shared about how he thinks that abstinence is important. He thinks that marriage is important and fidelity. And, he wants to have a marriage like his parents. Like, saying those things, I think, is a great example to other men.
All right, I'm going to throw a crazy illustration off of you, and you tell me if you think this is good. When Zuby, one of the last times I was on his podcast was right after the George Floyd stuff. And I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with the sentiment that Black Lives Matter. I said, I think it's true.
Yeah.
I said, that doesn't mean we backdoor all the ideologies
100%
of the organization, of Marxism, of disruption of the nuclear family.
Why is that so controversial to say?
It's not, right?
Well, I said the same thing. And it's like, why can't you just have that? It's not even that nuanced of a view.
I think because people have trouble seeing nuance. I think we want to have out groups and in groups.
I mean, yeah, but I think because I think BLM, the organization, has been involved in some nefarious things and obviously is infiltrated by these other ideologies.
And I said to him, I said, in the same way that the BLM organization was pointing to real issues with awful prescriptions, is in the same way that some of the red pill is pointing at real issues with awful prescriptions, and are emotionally appealing to people that are hurting. Because if there was no truth to it, then there wouldn't be a BLM organization that could have $60 million and buy multiple mansions and do all this crazy fraud that they did.
Well, and
allegedly,
every
let me say
house
allegedly.
in America has the BLM sign. I mean, it was an impressively impactful campaign.
Yes. And I said to me, they're very similar in terms of the assessing some of the right problems with wrong conclusions and bad ideologies backdoored. And I said, it's interesting. I said, because the same empathy you're able to extend to the red pill, like I was able to extend to folks that were part of the Black Lives Matter movement, even though I disagreed with the conclusions and the prescriptions of the organization, and he sat there and thought about it and was like, that's a fair point, because he was very like, at the time, he was very like, what do you mean? Like, there's no racism. Like, he wasn't like that extreme, but he was definitely like, this is overhyped. What do the statistics say? What did this say? And I was just like, yeah, man, but like people are really hurting, and this is a real issue to specific people. In the same way where he would say men are really hurting, this is a real issue to specific men. It's harder for men. And I'm like, it is kind of a reasonable parallel. So we went out to dinner and talked about that. I wish I would have talked to him about this. It didn't hit me until we were at dinner, and I was like, yeah, man, like, cause I was labeled a Marxist and all this stuff. Cause I was like, guys, like, no, what happened to George Floyd's wrong. Like, Black lives do matter. This is not okay. Now I'm hyper capitalist. I'm free market. I think all the nuclear family disruption stuff is all wrong. I think I actually don't know a single person that donated to that organization, but I know a lot of people that went out to the protests. And so, you know, that was kind of where we had that.
I think people are just attracted to very strong shows of leadership and very clear, simple, strong messages.
Yes.
Whether we want to agree or we disagree vehemently.
Yep.
And so you use the word nuance, and I think nuance can also be an excuse for not taking a strong stand when you need to take a strong stand. So some people do that.
Yes.
But there is nuance with some of these issues when it comes to, especially, the branding or the marketing of the message connected to the players involved with the branding of the marketing of the message.
Absolutely.
And the complexity of one message alongside another one, and they actually don't go together.
Yep.
So, just got to break it down. And, I know a lot of Christians obviously follow your work and mine too. And I think that's where like the study of Jesus Christ and his message, and him as the word, like being a disciple, for all the time we spend listening to me, you, Zuby, all these guys, listen to the Lord,
That's good.
Get in the word and I'm Catholic. So part of it is the Bible and it's the magisterium of the church, 2,000 years of church tradition. Study that, know your history.
Yeah.
I mean, think about like Mary and Jesus and the disciples. They knew their history. They knew the prophecies. They knew the promises of the Lord. So know your history of your church, know the history, the 2,000 years history of Christianity from the beginning of Jesus Christ when he started it, and understand what he's how he wants you to live. Because that's really the only way to navigate all these ideologies.
Yeah, that's good.
Like there's so much ideology out there.
I think, and the tricky part is with so much ideology out there, sometimes empathy and nuance can get weaponized to promote a false ideology. And I want to kind of have your take on some of this stuff when even in the video you posted that I was in on Instagram, there was someone that like went back and forth with me.
I think
I don't know if you saw the whole
Good
thread.
for you for engaging.
I was
that
so
was good.
irritated. But
I'm like, Ruslan's having a bad moment.
Yeah.
He's like, I know.
I think
That was
because I want the smoke. Like I have no problem with sitting down with anyone and debating
That's
this
great.
stuff, right?
That's good.
I like it. And the use of nuance in terms of the pro-choice position is often used, right? And so walk me through some of the I guess rebuttals to some of the points of nuance, right?
So here's the thing. In the world of nuance, you need your bright line morality.
Yeah.
And there's certain bright line moralities that have been widely, universally recognized throughout civilizations, throughout human history. And they have to do with these fundamentals like do not, do not steal.
Yep.
Also have no idols before me. Put God as God. Honor your mother and your father.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
10 Commandment stuff.
Yes.
Recognized by Judeo-Christian Jews and Christians for centuries.
Yeah.
Hey, did you know that you can watch videos like this on the Spotify app? We now are on Spotify under Ruslan Bless God Podcast. So if you're driving and you want to go back and forth between listening to the podcast and just the audio or watching the video, consider doing it now on the Spotify app as well as all podcast platforms. All right, I'll see you over there.
And so if your fundamental principles do not, and in particular, do not kill an innocent person.
Yes.
Right? Because if
you can't nuance that away.
Right. You can't nuance that away. So like, do not somebody. Okay,
Yes.
well, what if
Right.
you don't do it?
Yep.
So when it comes to a child in the womb, there is no good reason to have an abortion.
Yes.
And someone will say, well, what if it's a medical condition? And we can kind of walk through the biggest arguments, right? Like this is the nuance that proves the point, right?
Yep.
The first step, though, is to say every advocate that I know, sort of in the public space, they're not advocating for abortions only legal
Right.
in these super rare cases.
Right.
They advocate for what? A woman's right to choose.
Yep.
It's up to the woman to decide if it's an important decision, if it's a case that's worthy of it. So they're not even claiming it's just the nuance, extra super nuanced cases. They just use those as justifications for all the other abortions.
100%.
97 to 99% of abortions are for convenience.
Absolutely.
According to surveys.
Right.
I mean, they're just the 1% basically that's for these extreme cases like an incest.
Yep.
But even in those cases, so let's talk about like the health issue. Like I'm going to die without my this is like
That's the biggest objection. The mother's health.
That's probably very at least top 3, if not top. And the answer to that is you have to break down what actually is going on there, because going inside a woman and intentionally ending the life of her preborn child is not a medical treatment. There is no medical condition a woman has that needs you to have a dead baby inside her. Now, there might be an extreme rare medical condition she has where you might need to deliver that baby earlier than full term. And in those cases, which are extremely rare, what a pro-life doctor does is watch and see, provide care to the mother. She's usually hospitalized in these severe cases, to try to get the baby to term enough that can be delivered early and still save that baby's life.
Yes. Save both lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, in some very, very rare cases, you may have to do an early delivery of that baby, but you're not going in there and targeting that baby's body for destruction, ripping it up, giving it a lethal injection. That's how late-term abortions are done. You're doing an early delivery because it's a medical emergency and there's no other way. But in vast majority, even of those extreme cases, there is another way. You wait and see. You monitor the mother. You monitor the baby. Because today, I think a lot of doctors, they don't want lawsuits. They want to just do something quick and not have to deal. I mean, dealing with the patient, caring for the mother and the baby in the hospital setting for weeks on end, it's a lot of work. It's like, oh, have the just get pregnant later, have the because it's easier than me having to care for both of you as I'm required to under my moral law as a doctor, right?
Yeah.
So you got to look. I mean, I've interviewed former abortionists and doctors who've worked in high risk pregnancy centers specifically. I think about Dr. Anthony Levatino worked with high risk pregnancies in Upper New York, tens of thousands of pregnancies. He says not one was an abort necessary, not one. This whole medically necessary thing is a lie, and there are thousands of medical professionals who have signed their name to the Dublin Declaration, which is a national declaration of healthcare professionals saying it is never medically necessary to do an abortion.
That's good.
The baby.
Another lie is miscarriage. That's the most yuck. I just go,
yuck. It is
ugh.
so.
That's just so deceiving.
It's so messed up.
They say that
It's
in
like
certain...
the person, we bury dead people.
Yeah.
So if you bury an alive person, it's just like burying a dead person.
Right.
That's the person who equates miscarriage with is the person who equates burying a dead body and burying a living body.
Yeah.
If the baby's dead inside the mother, removing that baby's body because it hasn't naturally passed yet, he or she hasn't naturally passed yet, is not an Now, medical coding, they might put on the coding because induced spontaneous in some medical coding means actually a natural miscarriage. But we're not talking about legal.
Yeah.
When we have these pro-life debates legally, we're wanting to ban elective abortion, right? Not spontaneous, which is a miscarriage. You can't ban. I mean, obviously that's just it's a tragedy. So, but if the baby is alive and you kill that baby, that's an abortion and should be banned.
Yeah, I think there was some there was some law that came out where they basically tried to say that based on how the law was written and based on the coding or something like that, that it could potentially make it more complicated.
Then fix the code if you need to. And that's a matter of like fixing codes. It's not a matter of we should legalize the mass slaughter of children in the womb.
Incest.
Horrific. Same with obviously. It's a form of I mean, you can't it's hard to imagine something worse to happen to a child, right? And in a case of incest, if pregnancy results or if pregnancy results, you've got two victims now. You've got this young girl or this child, this in some cases, I guess incest could be older, but typically we're talking about teen girls, young girls. Yeah,
there's a girl that I think she was 10 or something like that. And she was, what state was this? And there was a big fuss because she had to drive across state lines to get in I don't remember.
The doctor kind of made her case the reason to legalize it. But what's the answer? What's the solution, right? Well, first of all, you remove her from harm because as I investigated at Planned Parenthood for years, undercover posing as an underage victim, clinics aren't like separating you from your abuser. They send you back into the arms of the abuser. And in fact, one of the things that we've documented is court cases where underage girls, 12, 13, sue Planned Parenthood because they went back, was sent back to their sometimes father who was raping them and no one intervened. So they just they kept getting raped, kept getting pregnant, going to Planned Parenthood for abortions, sent back to the abuser. So I say that because even that case that you're mentioning about that, I think it was Alabama.
Ohio, I think it was.
Ohio?
Yeah, it wasn't incest. It was a 10-year-old that was raped by like a family friend or something like that.
Yeah, and you never heard like, are they being held accountable? It was justice served. You know, is she safe now from that abuser? Because in many cases they're not safe afterwards. So the first step is making sure she's safe, making sure she has counseling, medical care. But the next step to turn the penalty against that innocent third party, that child that's been conceived. We don't even give the death penalty. It's against federal law to give the death penalty to rapists in this country.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Why is it okay to give the death penalty to a child?
Yep.
And that's not to say in any way that, you know, 10-year-olds should be getting pregnant. It's horrible. That's why one of the reasons the rape was so horrible is that you're violating a person's body and you're with the possibility of getting them pregnant when they do. This is not something, they're 10 years old. It's disgusting.
Right.
But the other question to ask too is she going to be healed? Is she going to be untraumatized by having an abortion? No.
Probably going to be more traumatized.
It's more traumatized. So yes, it's a horrible situation. Yes, it's extremely, you know, it should make all of us angry. It should make all of us like want to fight again to protect children. But the answer is not to kill the innocent third party.
Yeah.
The answer is to love them both, care for them both.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I remember hearing that story and just thinking like, what a rough situation, but why would we want to induce more trauma? Now, obviously that is like, oh my gosh, 10-year-old pregnant. What a awful situation to be in. The interesting thing about that is that I'd have to pull the statistic up, but I remember reading that the vast majority of victims actually keep the baby.
They do.
Which is wild.
It's been very, it's not been studied very much because no one's trying to, the pro-abortion the side isn't really interested in like exploring whether survivors are better off having their children because in their minds, you just have the abortion. That's their solution to sexual trauma that results in pregnancy. Just have an abortion, which can be additional trauma. But there was a survey done. I think it was over 80 survivors, some of them very young, and the majority of them chose life for their babies. And they afterwards, at large majority, were saying, "I'm so glad that I chose life." And the ones that chose, the majority of them were saying, "I wish I had not had the."
I know quite a few folks that
because you live with the rest of your life.
Yeah, and I was gonna say I know quite a few folks that have unfortunately had abortions, and I don't know any of them that don't regret it, especially after they have kids. When they have kids of their own, and then they're like, it like really hits them, like, oh my gosh, like what did I do? You know? And I think that's the aspect that seldom gets talked about is the reality of that, you know, of the shame and like having to carry that. The philosophical concept of personhood. When does personhood begin? What is your rebuttal to? Because I think it's a moot point. I don't give a crap on personhood because that's a human in there with unique DNA that should have a shot at life. And I'm pretty sure if you left that person alone, he would form into a baby and come to term. And I'm pretty sure that person at 20, 30, 40, 50 years would have probably preferred the option. Maybe I'm wrong, would have probably preferred the option to be alive than not be alive.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're a human, you're a person.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty simple. And once we start to say some humans aren't persons is when we open the door to human rights abuses. And that's what's happened historically, right? So, you know, Jews are subhuman. They're not persons. They're not recognized under the same law as German citizens who are of Aryan descent. So they're therefore less than, and now we can just them, right? Blacks are less than human because they're black. You know, like all of the human rights abuses have one thing in common, and it's dehumanization, which claims that you are less than, you are not personhood status, even though you share our same humanity. You're not really that human because I don't like you for some reason. You're inconvenient. You're the wrong color. You're the wrong nationality. Like something about you I hate. So I'm going to dehumanize you.
Yeah.
And with the unwanted unborn child, that's what is happening. When there's a wanted pregnancy, oh my gosh, I'm so congratulations on your baby. We're going to throw a baby shower. You know, I'm having a baby. It's a boy or it's a girl, whatever. If it's unwanted, it's a fetus. It's an embryo. It's not I'm just going to have this is a clump of cells. It's not, you don't even give it human terms, right? That's not coherent.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
They're both just as human.
Yep. And you talk about dehumanizing. I mean, there's strong overlap of Margaret Sanger and some of her wild, views on race and some of this stuff. And so even in the origins of some of this stuff, it doesn't seem like
not a good place to
come from.
Well, yeah, she's the founder of Planned Parenthood. She founded it as the Birth Control League before it became Planned Parenthood. Originally, it was all about handing out birth control and sterilization. She was actually for sterilizations of the disabled. And she was also this is the founder of Planned Parenthood, she was also for, you need a permit from the government. She wanted to do a one-child policy in the United States like they had in China.
Yep.
And you would have to apply for a permit and in order to have a child.
Yep.
And if you didn't get a permit, you would not be allowed to have children or you would be sterilized. That's what she wanted.
That's darkness.
It's so dark.
Yeah.
And she's celebrated now as like this founder of women's rights.
Yeah.
It's kind of insane.
Yeah.
But anyways, she was also a eugenicist. And she supported she would pen pal actually with some eugenicists in Nazi Germany at the time, interestingly. And they would talk about like their solutions for making cleaner races. Yeah. And in her mind, the solution was mostly contraceptives and sterilization of minority communities and of the disabled.
How do so many people just like remove this part from history? Like, because it seems like not a lot of people even know this. And then the people who know this just like, I'm trying to think of like, how do you logically maneuver around that?
It's the power of narrative, right? So whoever is telling the history has the power and you can rewrite history and you can say, oh, she's great. And like, all of feminism is great. Yeah, some of feminism was great, early feminism. It's been a lot that's been horrible. Yeah. But if you have the power to write the history, if you're the one setting the school curriculum in our schools, if you're the one whose ideological friends are the newspaper editorial board or the editorial room at CNN, all the newspapers, if you're the one who is, backing the big studios in Hollywood, if you're the one who has the seats at the corporate tables in the boardrooms at big tech companies, Jeff Bezos's ex-wife, and he's aligned with the same ideology. His ex-wife donated the biggest single gift to Planned Parenthood in its history. No one knows this. Like very few people know this. But she took some of the Amazon wealth and she gave, I think it was over $100 million to Planned Parenthood. But so think about the power that she has to perpetuate the lies. Planned Parenthood is a almost $2 billion organization. They're perpetuating the lies about their founder, about their origins, about their intentions, about their operations. What do you do in the face of all those lies?
Yeah. Yeah, that's heavy. What else? There is.
Like, that's heavy. Let's move on now.
Yeah. Well, because it just feels daunting.
But the good news is that as many Americans are pro-life as pro-choice. Yeah. Over time, as you test, most Americans support abortion bans. Yeah. Most Americans support abortion bans. Yep. So, like, there's a lot. Pro-life America is passionate. It's growing. So that's the power of truth. Yeah. You can have decades of lies. Yep. And you speak truth to those lies, and they crumble. So that's the power.
Something else that people often say in response to that is, hey, the vast majority of abortions happen, within the first trimester. The vast majority of them are in a pill form. And late-term abortion it's such a small percentage, and it's usually done in the most rarest cases. What is kind of the response to that? Like, oh, it's okay because it's earlier in the pregnancy.
I mean, the child is 3 years old, not 1 year old. So it's okay. The child can't speak yet. So it's okay. It's still a child. Yeah. And, there's tens of thousands of late term still happening every single year. Yeah. And the child in the first trimester is a human being. Maybe the child's not being dismembered with a forceps the way the child in the second trimester is, but they're being poisoned by a pill. Does it make it any better?
Right. Right. Yep.
And for people listening, there's something called a pill reversal. Actually, a group in San Diego helped develop it. Some doctors in San Diego, Dr. Delgado, I think I'm going to be interviewing him soon on my podcast. You should have him on too. But he helped invent, I mean, it's not really some complicated invention because you're using progesterone, FDA approved progesterone, like a hormone replacement to help keep the baby from dying and nourish that baby. But you can reverse the pill if you take some progesterone in time. You get involved with the pill reversal network. There have been 4,000 lives saved. Wow. So I just wanted to say that really quick in case anyone listening.
That's dope.
They should know about it. Know about the hotline, pillreversal.com.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to even have that as an option, I think is huge. trying to think of what are the other like rebuttals that people always come with.
I mean, there's like overpopulation.
Oh, that's nonsense.
I mean,
Yeah.
I agree.
The overpopulation is so
Climatism, like
climatism.
the world's gonna end.
Yeah, I'm actually doing a video, Economics Explained, which is a massive non-Christian YouTube channel. Just came out with a video with the debate of like, is overpopulation or underpopulation a real issue? And so like, I think the data is showing that like underpopulation is going to be a bigger threat than overpopulation to civilization. So yeah, but that doesn't mean that there aren't. I know of a vegan influencer that got a vasectomy because of overpopulation in his 20s before he got married or had kids. Yeah. And I'm just like,
That's so sad.
you're a freaking weirdo, man.
So sad.
Like that's the most.
Yeah.
That's really, the most like, oh my gosh, I saw that and I was like,
so
wow.
Sad.
I
mean, children are our greatest wealth, our greatest resource. And, you know, if you're like, where would the future of humanity be without children?
Right. Right.
We wouldn't have it.
And in the video, he talks about how that as much as our population has increased, our output and our ability to innovate has like way outgrown the population growth. How many people we're able to feed, how much good we're able to do has like way exceeded the actual growth of the population. I want to say by 20x or something crazy like that.
Well, yeah, I mean so there have been fears about overpopulation now for a few centuries. And the earliest ones in the 19th century would say, we're going to run out of food. And then technology would advance and human beings would get smarter and better. And we didn't run out of food. Now we are the wealthiest, like at large. There's a group called, I think it's called humanprogress.org. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're also a great Twitter feed. And I'll correct this if it's wrong, but I think it's Human Progress. But they talk about how you look at all these markers of human flourishing, how many people have food today versus 100 years ago. The poverty level has risen in terms of what's to consider poverty today was considered, not wealth, but considered like, middle class basically decades ago, that our poorest poor are better off than ever. And more people are better off than the large majority of people centuries ago. So humanity is progressing in that sense because of technology and other things too. I do think that it's not just technology is progressing and automatically we progress. Because you can use technology for bad ends, but overall we're holding to a moral compass to use technology for good.
That's good.
But we can use technology for evil, which is happening with a lot of reproductive technologies today, which is another topic.
Yeah. Another pushback is that church history and the Jewish faith isn't clear cut on as we would like it to be known in the pro-life movement today.
It's just not true. You go back to early church history and they forbid abortions. So something called the Didache, which is kind of like the early church catechism of sorts, like the first sort of like pastoral letter to the early church.
Explicitly condemn it.
Explicitly condemns thou shalt not take any drug designed to abort, and also condemns infanticide too, obviously, because that was kind of part and parcel with the kill the newborn, kill the unborn. And the early Christians were passionately pro-life. And you also just look at, you look at scripture. And you can read the pro-life story in scripture so beautifully. Jesus entered the world as a single-cell embryo. He didn't choose to come as a newborn. He didn't choose to come as an adult male. He came in the womb of his mother as a single-cell embryo. And I think that's so powerful to show the humanity. And then Mary, in Gospel of Luke, goes to see her cousin Elizabeth after she's in her first trimester. Her cousin Elizabeth, also pregnant by a miracle of the Lord, is having John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. And Mary goes to visit Elizabeth and take care of her, basically. She's about to have a baby. She's an older woman. And John the Baptist is in the third trimester. And it says John the Baptist leaped for joy at the voice of Mary at the doorstep. He was in the presence of his Savior, embryo Jesus. And fetus John the Baptist is like celebrating with the Holy Spirit. I mean, what more humanizing image can you get of two unborn babies and their mothers? And that's their like a centerpiece story in the gospel.
Because they would say that quickening was the standard of when life began.
Well, preborn, first trimester Jesus wasn't quickened yet, and the reason quickening was such a standard is they didn't have the medical wisdom. They didn't have the technology to understand life before quickening the way we do. They didn't have ultrasound. They didn't understand what we understand today. And so quickening, then they really knew they were pregnant. Because there's no way to check out, there's no blood test, there's no ultrasound to make, if you feel a baby moving in you, you have a baby. Like that was their standard, right? But
that's good.
they, today we can know we're pregnant before quickening.
Yeah. What about in the Jewish tradition? They say, oh, the Jews are unsettled about this. And if you look at what they thought when Jesus was around, they were not sure. And the rabbis would debate on this.
I mean, you can have, and in the Jewish tradition, you have rabbis who advocate for any number of things that other Jews, Orthodox Jews, would say, no, this is not what we teach. So because there's disagreement doesn't mean that something immoral is okay. But there's absolutely hardcore pro-life rabbis and Jews who are like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not listen to innocent life. We should not.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Gosh, I'm throwing all of them off of you. These are all the ones that the guy brought up in that thread.
Oh, okay.
On our Instagram.
Thanks for
post.
producing that thread.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, the quickening thing was always interesting because I feel like the modern pro-life movement really exploded with the documentary that came out in the 80s when the ex-pro-choice doctor got access.
Silent Scream.
The Silent Scream. And that was when people actually saw what was happening at a 12-week.
He was Jewish.
Oh, interesting.
Dr. Bernard Nathanson was a kind of a pro-abort Jewish doctor and ended up becoming passionately pro-life, leaving his practice. And I think he ended up converting actually to Catholicism, interestingly. He writes in Hand of God is his autobiography. It's an incredibly gripping read about his life story. He aborted his own child. He killed his own child. He killed, I think, 40,000 children in his practice.
Yeah.
But he became pro-life, and then he ended up filming, and you can see the baby running away from the instruments. Yeah. And this was on ultrasound.
It's heartbreaking. Yeah. Yeah. We had this conversation with my therapist, and he pointed me to that movie, and I kind of started learning more of the history, and I was like, oh, okay, like this makes a ton of sense when you actually see what's happening. Then you go, okay, this is way different than how it's presented in a narrative that's being pushed. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and most folks don't want to go understand what's actually happening. It's like out of sight, out of mind. Right. Have you ever seen Freakonomics?
Yeah.
So one of the things,
the book, right? Or is there a documentary?
There's a documentary, and in Freakonomics, they basically. I don't think I've
seen the documentary, but I know the book.
But they basically make the argument that they don't use the language necessary evil, but they basically say it's a necessary evil that has helped with limiting violence and crime because all of the people that statistically would grow up in poverty to be violent criminals got aborted when Roe v. Wade got passed, and that's why we have more. That's why we have less crime. Yeah,
I mean, it's so racist because the black rate is 3 to 5 times higher than the white rate. Like these are the population that's struggling and suffering the most. It's basically saying let's just delete them. Let's just kill them because we're all better off instead of let's address the root causes of their suffering and help them get out of poverty. I mean, ever thought of that? Like,
yeah.
It's kind of a dumb one. It's like, you just can kill poor people.
Just get them out of here.
Yeah. Or you can help them.
Pro-life activists don't do enough to adopt babies and to care for single mothers, care for victims.
I mean, I think we can all always do more, but we're doing more than anyone else. The pro-life community is adopting and fostering and serving. I mean, as an example, there's thousands of pregnancy resource centers across this country that are not receiving taxpayer dollars. They're providing services that Planned Parenthood is not offering. So they're providing prenatal care. They're providing help for single moms to parent their children, material care for single moms and for young families to help have their children. Planned Parenthood, you don't go to Planned Parenthood and get free diapers.
Yep.
They're going to say, we'll give you an.
Yep.
So the pro-life community is actually doing more for mothers and for children than any other group. And they should get taxpayer support to do it, quite frankly.
Yeah. Elizabeth Warren came down really hard on the pro-life centers, which was really weird. I think even Joe Rogan acknowledged when he was sitting down with Seth Dillon from the Babylon Bee about how weird it would be to take away or to try to come down on these pregnancy resource centers. Like, so when you got Joe Rogan saying, like, who's pro-choice, by the way, saying like this is an incoherent conclusion is to take away people that are trying to help resources.
It's a choice. Yeah. If you are truly pro-choice and you think abortion's okay, why aren't you at least okay with not abortion? That's what pregnancy centers offer.
Yep. okay, here's an interesting one. The morning after pill, right? Sometimes people will categorize that as an. Other times people say, well, it's technically, it has to latch onto the uterary wall, which can be after the 24-hour time span, meaning that it could take longer for the latch to happen. What do you personally think about
It's
this?
unclear.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend anyone take it.
Yeah.
It's unclear. What's a little more clear is like birth control pills can act as abortifacients.
Yeah.
That's actually written into the fine print of a lot of birth control pills, that because it basically weakens the lining of the uterus, it prevents implantation, like you're saying. So the baby gets aborted very early term. But it's unclear with your morning after pill. I would just say, I mean, my rule of thumb, especially for Christians listening, like we have our moral standards very clear. And it's this: belongs in marriage.
Yep. Amen.
Obviously mistakes can be made and are made. If they are, accept the responsibility. If God gives a child in that situation, accept that responsibility, that beauty, that God has a plan. But I think if we just kind of shift the conversation towards honor and respect, sexual integrity, sexual respect, I think that does a ton of good. You know, will change, can help change society.
Amen.
The problem is a lot of Christians, I think, we listen to the same music, we watch the same shows, we swim in the same water of our non-Christian friends, and we sort of get tempted to live by the same standards. And I think if we can live differently and attract people with the beauty and intensity with which we live, and putting back where it belongs in marriage, we can be tremendous examples to other people.
Because what you're also getting at is the preventative measures in.
Exactly. That's what that's a simple way to say it. Exactly. Like all this talk of the morning after pill. It's like, well, why have we ever tried self-control?
Yeah. I mean,
it always kind of amazed me, like this idea, and back to the red pill stuff, this idea that like we're fated to have, like it's just like, well, you have to have. No, you don't.
Yeah.
And yeah, some people have higher drives than others. Some people have addictions that they need, actual clinical help for, and they maybe have deep traumas that are like feeding that, and sexual deviancies that they need, like actual things that they need to unbury in their childhoods, or things that they've endured. So there's complexity there, right? But we have self-control, and we can practice that, and we can put back where it belongs, which is in a loving, lifelong, committed relationship where you may have kids. It's called marriage. A public, loving, relationship.
Why should women who perhaps make the mistake, teenage mothers, so on and so forth, of being promiscuous or not being promiscuous, just sleeping with their boyfriend, and maybe they didn't know the biology of how it worked, why should they have to then deal with the practical consequences of having a baby, and also the economic challenges that they're going to have to face?
Meaning like the guy is often gets off scot-free.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's a problem. Like that guys can get off scot-free. That's where obviously there's child support.
Legally they can't in terms of child support, but even
can't.
child support, I think the average payment is like $300 a month.
Yeah, I mean, that's where back to the whole red pill stuff. Guys, do you know like the single mothers you guys are making?
Yep.
Like maybe it's an accident, like, oh, it wasn't supposed to happen, but where's the responsibility for that? Like, I don't know. I just think the end solution is we each have to take responsibility, and especially if a teen girl is getting pregnant, that's a responsibility. If she has a family, she doesn't have a family, the local church to come alongside her and help her, and also try to corral that young man towards commitment. Not saying that they have to then get married or something, because that's a question mark. Like if you get pregnant with someone, that doesn't mean you necessarily should marry them. Maybe sounds controversial in some circles, but it all depends on circumstances, on where the people are at, what's going on. That's where adoption sometimes can be a beautiful solution. Obviously that comes with its own tragedy. Like anytime a biological mother is separated from her baby, there's pain there, So there's complexity. Like the practical solutions for these things involve different people, involve different decisions. There's a lot of, every case is going to be a little different, but I think the through lines are we should support and not shame pregnant mothers, including that 14-year-old teen girl. Like she deserves respect and support. This idea, like I heard a story of a girl who was not allowed to walk at her high school graduation because she was pregnant. It was like some Christian school. And
That's crazy.
the guy, I think he might've walked, he wasn't walking around carrying the baby. Obviously he didn't carry the pregnancy. He didn't have that. The girl had experienced that. Like how dare that school do that? They're just because you're pregnant, being pregnant is not a crime. Being pregnant deserves actually a status of support and respect for other people, that you're carrying a precious child that deserves love and care. So you should get that love and care too. And if there's any shame, outside of marriage I think it's a bad thing. It's a harmful thing. It's destroying society. So we can talk about shame there, and not to shame people who make mistakes, but saying, there's a natural shame that comes when you're having sex with someone that you're not married to. And I think in a sense there's good shame, not shame that destroys a person's self-esteem and their whole identity, but a shame that helps direct them towards doing the right thing. Like, don't keep the shame with you. Just make the right choice and try to strive towards the right thing. But to shame a woman who's pregnant, I think is sick. And in the Christian world particularly, we have to be especially sensitive about that.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. I got one. I'm gonna bounce my hot take on the entire conversation off of you.
Nice.
To the very, 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 very simplest form. And I want to know what you think, but it's a little too hot for the public YouTube. So we're going to go to our Patreon exclusive section right now. Meet us over there if you want to hear an extended version of this conversation. I have a few more questions for Lila and some questions from our online community. Here's my hot take. Okay. And I haven't made a video about this, but see what you think. This entire conversation to me is going to come down to one of two tragedies, one of two evils. One tragedy is women don't get the right to go after their dreams and their financial aspirations and their career aspirations if they have a baby prematurely. That's the doomsday worst case scenario. Or babies don't get a right at life, right? And so if I'm looking at it from a completely black pill doomsday scenario, those two evils, right, quote unquote evils, I'm going to choose protecting the baby and protecting the right of someone that is the most vulnerable to live over protecting the right of the woman that wants her self-actualization.
Well, that baby could be a girl.
Or that baby could be a girl. Yeah.
Can go on
Plot
to get
twist.
an education, plot twist, and get an education and, have a career. Like, it's her whole life in front of her.
Right.
So
what do you think of, like, if I have to break it all down and I have to go to that's what the two sides are arguing, right? One is like, you're not allowing women to do what they want and go after their dreams and goals, and the other side is saying you're not protecting babies who are the most vulnerable. And if I got to look at those two, I'm just gonna go, well, I mean, there's natural consequences, and even for the 1% times where the woman didn't do anything wrong, I'm still going to side with the more vulnerable person in the situation.
Yeah, I totally agree, but I also don't think. I know you said it's like the doomsday scenario, but listen, how do we get to a point as a society where motherhood is so denigrated that it's seen as this like worst possible,
right.
Like, because you're not talking about mother versus career, even in that, or that you're talking about baby versus career. You're talking about like being a mother of that baby.
Yeah. Which you have to pause your career and you have to pause your dreams, and you might have to take a couple semesters off from school and whatever.
Right, but two things. First of all, why isn't education and work more accommodating of parenting?
That's a great question.
So that's the first thing.
Yep.
And then the second thing is, like, if our end goal as a society is pure productivity and money, we're going to be a miserable, broken, unhealthy, dying society.
That's good.
It has to be human beings and their flourishing.
Yep.
Flourishing includes economic, but it's more than economic, right?
Yes.
But then the other part of it too is, where do we get to the point where, like, the ultimate expression of like being an empowered woman is to be like really rich or really famous,
or to do what you want to do for work,
or just to do
your passion for work,
to do your passion for work. Those things can be good. It's not bad to be rich. I guess it's not bad to be famous, although it has its downsides, I guess. But like, and work can be beautiful and is beautiful, I think.
Yes.
But since when since when is motherhood seen as lower than those things?
Yep.
And I think that is an all of us problem.
Yeah.
And it's partly because of feminism, especially like modern feminism. But it's also, I think it even exists in the church to some degree. Like, we see the stay-at-home mom as kind of like a fuddy-duddy. Like, she's just this girl who doesn't have any ambition, and she's not very intelligent. She's not very skilled. She's not a big contributor. She's not very beautiful. Like, we just sort of look down.
Wow.
On moms, especially like the stay-at-home mom, when they are our queens, like they are our royalty, and start to treat them like that. Like, this gets me almost emotional because I think about my mom and the sacrifices she made, and I think about the sacrifices I'm trying to make for my family, and like, and men are kings, like stay-at-home men in the terms of like, their priority isn't making money. Their priority is their family, and their money is to serve their family and their community,
That's
right?
good. Yep.
It's a reprioritizations of why am I working?
Yep.
Yes, use your talents.
Yep.
Yes, pursue your dreams.
Yep.
But to what end?
Yes.
Is it
Yes.
to serve your family, to serve your community?
Yep.
Or is it for your own selfish gain?
Come on. Yeah. That's good. That's good. Obviously I think we need to reframe motherhood, but I think we also need to reframe what is possible despite challenging circumstances.
For sure. And
Right.
like, motherhood is a superpower, and it requires excellence.
Yeah.
Now not to say like we as automatically excellent as mothers. We work at it, right? It requires talent.
Yep.
And I would also just say anyone listening who's a mom, God gave you your kids, and you have a special anointing, spiritually speaking and psychologically, to mother your child.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's another thing. We compare ourselves. We we watch mommy bloggers or Instagram mamas, and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm failing. Like, mother the way you mother.
Yeah.
Like, learn the principles, grow in virtue, but like do it the way that you do it. Like your children need you specifically, not someone else's mom.
Yep.
There's not like this like cookie cutter mom.
Right.
Like this
One
is the
size
perfect
fits
mom.
all,
No,
yeah.
moms look different.
Yep.
Some moms are really athletic and adventurous. Some moms are really good at like making the home look pristine.
Yep.
Some moms are really good at like activities and like doing interesting. Some moms are working moms, and they're going to try to accommodate, their children, accommodate their work around their kids, but they want to contribute, and they're called to contribute. So there's complexity and there's nuance in how you mother. Have the principles of, put your spouse and kids first. Like don't put I don't think ever put work first. Like work should be is there to serve the family.
Yeah.
But I think we should just focus on celebrating motherhood more.
Yeah.
And in a way, even glamorize is a weird word, because glamorize can often be a bad thing, but and romanticize can also be a bad thing. But I don't know. Remember, I would just say even like the poetry of motherhood. Like, it's the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Like there is truth to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you have so much power as a mother. So
I think that's so good. And I think we lose that. And unfortunately, people will create bigger obstacles for things than there really are, but they miss the fact that the possibilities to overcome tough challenges, even if you are in poverty and you are in these dire situations, that a lot of times people having a baby is one of the greatest blessings to get them on track and figure it out and push through, And so I think it's like you remove the logical conclusion, the cause and effect, you remove that, and then it's almost like an out instead of it being a lesson and a way to transcend the tough situations.
Yeah, I would just say to someone who's listening, and if they're pregnant or they know someone who's pregnant, they're like, my life's over kind of feeling.
Yep.
My dreams are dead.
Yep.
Your life has changed.
Yep.
That's a fact.
Yep.
And there's going to be hard things about it.
Yep.
But it's going to be more beautiful and more rewarding.
Yeah.
And you're going to be able to accomplish more than you could have ever have dreamed.
Yeah. You have that external motivator now of a human.
Yes.
Which is
I
great.
would say becoming a mother, I feel like I'm becoming a wife first. I mean, my life has changed for the better in so many ways. I've grown.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have a rootedness now that I didn't have before. This is not to say that singles can't have rootedness and like can't have a beautiful, because some people are called to singleness, or some maybe they're just kind of waiting, saying, hey, am I going to marry or not? So God can meet you where you are. But I will just say, for me, saying yes to my husband and yes to getting married and yes to children, it has changed my life for the better in so many ways.
That's good. One of our Patreon members asked, what do you think of FDA considering to approve birth control pills to be sold over the counter?
Yeah, I mean, it's all awful.
Yeah.
It's like birth control pills, which can be abortifacients, by the way, and have so many health effects. It's medicating something. If they're being sold over the counter specifically, they're being sold as contraceptives. Because some people say, well, I take birth control for my acne, right? By the way, if you're taking birth control for your acne, I highly recommend finding a doctor who's not just going to prescribe you birth control for your acne.
It's a weird thing to say
Find
for
out.
acne.
A lot of girls are put on birth control for like really heavy bleeding, or find out the reason for that. Because the birth control pill is going to make you sick in other ways, and it's going to harm your fertility. So fertility is a sign of health. Heavy bleeding, there's something going on. Bad, really cystic acne, something bad could be going on. Your fertility, though, is not the problem. So treat the underlying hormonal imbalances. Find the doctors who will help you with that, as opposed to just giving you birth control. But when birth control is being sold over the counter, young girls are going to be taking this, damaging their bodies, leading to anxiety and depression. Like
Yep.
that's a fact, can lead to blood clots. I mean, there's so many negative health risks of birth control. And it's horrible.
Yep.
It's poison for kids,
Yep.
poison for girls.
Yeah.
All what? To be sexually available to men?
Yuck. Yeah.
That's what it's for.
Yeah. That's good. Look into the camera. Tell the people how they can fight
Where's the
this.
camera, by the way? Oh, there's
Your
the camera.
camera's right
Okay.
there. Tell the people how they can fight the good fight and what
Yeah.
they can do
Thanks.
to be a advocate for this.
Yeah. We need everyone involved in the pro-life fight because this is the human rights fight of our day. And spiritually called, we're called to love the least of these and the most vulnerable. And there's nobody more vulnerable than the child in the womb today and their mothers. And so get involved in the pro-life movement. Liveaction.org is my organization, and we're serving families and society at large with the truth, sharing education primarily, and connecting people to resources. Get involved in your local pregnancy center if you have one. If you don't, start one. I'm sure you do. Most groups do. And if you're involved in a church, talk to your pastor. Every church in America should have a full-time pro-life ministry who's focused on sexual integrity, who's focused on serving struggling families, who's focused on helping prevent abortions, and focused on advocating for the right to life for all children.
There you
If
go.
we do that as a church, I believe we can end abortion.
Lila Rose, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was
Thanks.
great.
Thanks for
All right,
listening.
guys. We're out of here. Be sure to subscribe to Lila Live Action. Check them out on all platforms. And hopefully we'll have you on again.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, if you want to see the extended version of this podcast, completely unedited, consider partnering with us in our online community for as little as $5 a month. In exchange, you get access to these podcasts as we stream them live before anyone else gets to see them. You get access to the replay of our daily after party streams, access to our private Discord server, access to discount codes, and so much more. So help us continue contextualizing the gospel through media, podcasting, and YouTube, and partner with us for as little as $5 a month. Also, be sure to follow us on the Spotify podcast app, on Facebook, and on Instagram. We're constantly posting content there that I think you'll find extremely valuable. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.